Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. Ben Rhymes is our special guest tonight. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Steve.
Really glad to have you here. It is the 6th of June. We started a half an hour late. Does that mean the kids are in bed?
The kids are in bed, and I checked 10 minutes ago. Eyes were closed. I hope that means we're asleep.
Not necessarily, right? The Future of Education is a Web 2.0 Labs project. Our School Leadership Summit in March was a ton of fun. All those sessions are up. The recordings are free to watch. Coming up this month is our unconference events around the ISTE conference, sort of the kind of the festival. So ISTE Unplugged, which starts with the all-day unconference Hack Education this year with Audrey Waters the Saturday beforehand. It's free. And because it's the Saturday before the conference starts, you don't even have to be registered for the conference. So if you're in the San Antonio or Texas area and you want to come just for Saturday, please feel free to. Again, that's an all-day unconference event. And then there's a party that night. There's the Bloggers Cafe. There's the Global Education Summit. All at isteunplugged.com. Coming up this summer, we're just about to announce the dates for the Homeschool Conference, the Worldwide Homeschool Conference, which will be in September, or in August. In September will be the STEMx Conference, that's STEM and everything else, sponsored by Hewlett-Packard. In October, the Future of Libraries Conference, Library 2.013 on the 18th and 19th of October. And then the Global Education Conference, which we don't have a new logo yet, but a week, 5 days, tons of fun, 24 hours a day in November for the Global Education Conference. These are all free. Go to web20labs.com to learn more. Coming up on this show, Larry Ferlazzo next week talks about his new book, Self-Driven Learning. I think it'll be Larry's third time on the show. Always really, really interesting to talk to Larry. Anyway, brand new book. I'm very excited to read it. Matt Hearn on his book, his books, and on the topic of deschooling. Will Richardson on Why School on July 9th, and Don Winkle on student entrepreneurship and the real flipped learning. And then scheduled way out in September, Doug Johnson on his new book, The Indispensable Librarian. We're still trying to reschedule Franz Johansson on his book, The Click Moment. If you are a business book reader, this is a book to read. And I'm going to make some really, what I think are fun connections to education. And we'll hope that some others have read it and be interested in the same. Okay, Ben, we're going to start a little early here. One of the things about Franz's book, The Click Moment, is that he basically shows how most business success is actually not planned but inadvertent, and often the matter of luck and chance. But the stories get told backwards, as though they were stories of premeditated success. And one of the points I take from that is that we often find it very easy to categorize a group of people as successful when it could just as easily be another group if the circumstances had been different. And do we have a large body of students who don't feel successful, or don't feel like good learners, not because of their own efforts, but because of the unique combination of circumstances that led them to where they are?
Wow, that's an excellent point. And before I talk about the students, I think it's a great point about the click moment. I had a flashback to From Good to Great. I don't know if you've read that book.
Mm-hmm.
And it identifies these really great, of course, hindsight is 20/20, and they're going back and they're analyzing all these very amazing, wonderful companies and what were they able to do to, whether, the hedgehog strategy and burning the rafts and all of that, trying to focus on what caused them to be successful. And the interesting thing is, just a few years after that book was published, one of the companies that they highlighted as being one of these models of a great company was Circuit City. And it completely folded. So certainly it's not a model for lasting. So anyway, that just popped into my head. I apologize.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. He tells the story of his own first book called The Medici Effect, which became very successful because it was used by diversity officers in large companies. And people actually told the story of a brilliant marketing strategy that he had created. And his response was, actually that was complete luck. I didn't intend that. I didn't even think of it. But if you think about students and you think about the Pygmalion effect, and you think about our expectations for students and where they live and grow up and the kind of influence, the adult influences they have, do we accept a story of talent versus no talent that's actually not accurate, right? And is it a moral imperative to recognize that there are no defective students or children? That this categorization that we do of students who are successful and not is in some ways terribly arbitrary.
Well, I think that's a very viable. That's a big list of names there. That's a very viable point, and I think you see that when students make big transitions. In my district, we have a consolidated campus. So we have all of our buildings all on one campus, and we see that more pronounced when students make a jump from building to building, from second grade to third grade because they're going to a new building, from fifth grade to sixth grade. And some might argue, well, there are different buildings or different climates, but I think a lot of times student success is built upon and predicated upon the fact that students maybe they are or aren't talented, but they have figured out, you mentioned earlier before we got started, Skinnerism, they have figured out which levers they need to press or in what order those levers need to be pressed in order to produce the results that teachers are looking for. Now, I'm not saying that to be pessimistic and saying that's what our students are doing, but it's certainly easy to do that. And when you make that jump to the next building, you go to junior high, or from junior high to high school. You're in a completely different setting, and you have to figure out all of these social norms and expectations and levers again of what's going to cause you to be successful in that new environment and with those new teachers. And I would go along with that, what you said.
Well, we've gotten ahead of ourselves. Okay, so here's the map. Those of you who are in the room, you can indicate where you're listening from. Look to the left of the map for the star icon. It's the second one down. You double-click on that and then click on the map. Feel free to put a note in the chat. I promise we will be talking about virtual and online book clubs. So, hey, we got a nice geographically diverse group. Australia, a couple in Asia, it looks like. So I'm guessing.
That's exciting.
Well, let us know. Tell us in the chat where, so I don't make an uneducated guess. And we'll move forward, but so the map won't be there. But please do note in the chat your location, time, anything you'd like to tell us about where you are.
I saw someone from Hawaii and I misspelled it.
So Ben, there is a Mighty Bell space for this session. It was actually on starting virtual book clubs that I created some months ago. But there's the link for those of you who use Mighty Bell or like it. I previously consulted for Mighty Bell, so there's full disclosure there. I don't consult for them currently, but I really like the concept. It's a sort of curation space for content and conversation. And there are about 25 people in that space talking about holding virtual book clubs, so hopefully we can keep that conversation going if you're interested. Okay, so let's start talking about Book Club 106. And tell us why you chose 106. I know there's a connection, but for those who don't know, what's the connection there?
So 106 is a reference to DS 106, or Digital Storytelling 106, which is a digital storytelling class. It's actually a computer science class being run under the guise of a digital storytelling class by Jim Groom, Martha Burtis, and a few other people over at the University of Mary Washington. And I believe you've had Jim on your podcast before, correct?
I have. I really like Jim. We talked about a domain of one's own.
Yep, exactly. And DS 106 is is a MOOC, but not a MOOC in the sense that most people think of MOOCs when they look at Coursera or Udacity and some of these other large, thousands of people in a single course. It's a connected, I guess you could say a connected or connectivist type MOOC. For those of you that might be listening that participated at ET MOOC, that was run by George Couros and a few other people just this last winter. It's really based on conversations, discussions, and DS-106 is digital storytelling, so it's based around using remixing the web in ways to tell new stories or taking old stories and making them new, and that covers everything from creating animated GIFs to doing remixed videos, sounds like that. So I'm a huge digital storytelling buff. I love DS-106, and there are lots of other things that are attached to DS-106. They have DS-106 radio, and they've got a few other little things on the side, and so I said, I'm going to do Book Club 106, because, hey, why not? The more the merrier, and people were receptive to it. Jim said, awesome. He didn't give me the thumbs down, so.
Well, I'm interested. Sort of book clubs are, by their very nature, kind of interactive, constructivist, sort of highly participative. The name kind of sends this message to those who are sort of in the know that there's a connection here. There's this deeper question for me of the technology enabling new things or trying to replicate things that we've liked using the technology. I'm trying to figure out about online book clubs. Right? Do they do something that we wish we could have done and make it possible to have sort of a virtual experience when we have trouble holding, most of us have trouble holding sort of physical book clubs? Or is it an idea that we have that it's going to work and it for some reason the technology doesn't really do what we think it's going to do? You've done 2 books now. Where does this sort of fall into the mix? Is this a great use of the technology? Is it a good use of the technology? Is it a wish it would be better use?
This falls somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, I would say. The tools are good. I've been using all Google tools to run it. I'm a big fan of the ethos of many pieces loosely joined. So I've been using Google+, I've been using Google Moderator, I've been using Google Sites, and then I've been using Google Forms and Docs to collect information. And I did that partly out of my own, I guess you could say, ignorance of some of Google's tools, and I wanted to learn some of that and better prepare myself for my own role that I serve in my district. But I saw where the tools could interact well with one another, complement each other, and not necessarily have to put all my eggs in one basket, so to speak. And so something like Google+, the Hangouts was really nice because that tool worked very well. It allowed us to have this face-to-face synchronous conversation like you would in a regular book club sitting down face-to-face, but then it also gave us the advantage of being able to hit that record button like you're doing with us this evening, so that people that couldn't participate and couldn't make that time, which of course is the difficult thing about any community-driven event, well, I can't make Thursday nights at 8:30, sorry, but I can come back over the weekend and I can watch the recording of the conversation. And that worked really well. There were some other elements of it, Google Moderator, that I had higher hopes for, and it didn't work as well as maybe something like a forum like a Google Plus community or the spaces on Mighty Bell, or even stretching way back to Ming or Facebook groups, something like that would do to help generate conversation.
Well, book club by its very nature tends to be something we think of as a sustained conversation. Right? So over the course of some period of time, reading portions of the book, getting together and talking about it. Is that actually kind of a part of our practice now? Meaning there's a degree to which a lot of what we do feels much more scattered, right? So we're responding to something in particular, we're tweeting, we get a response, there's a conversation that takes place in real time. Do people want the longer sustained And does this provide the opportunity, or is that a barrier, the sort of the sustained week-to-week participation?
Well, I would say both. I think people really do want the sustained conversation, and they really do want that time to decompress after reading something or experiencing something. We do want that, and I see that in my school every day, and I see that with the people that I interact with around the state. There's just a recognition that we don't have the time for that. At the same time, yes, it's difficult to say we're going to hold a 45-minute to 60-minute conversation, and those that are participating, I expect you to go back and watch the whole conversation after the fact. A lot of online courses now, it seems like increasingly when they point you to links of lectures or videos that you need to watch, it seems to me, though, as though they're getting shorter. Here's 3 links to 3, 5, or 10-minute videos. I don't see as many of the 60-minute long videos, short of the videos, say on TED, getting as much. And so when we did do the book, and Switch is an excellent example. You've got that up right now. It started off very well, and we had 4 people, I believe, in the first conversation. But there were a few weeks there where it was tough for people to make that, and so there was a week where there was just 2 or 3 of us. I actually had one week where it was just me talking into the camera. So that it has its ups and downs.
I'm really glad you mentioned the MOOCs, or at least the ex-MOOCs, right? The non-constructivist, connectivist MOOCs, and the linking to videos. And I'm interested in the way in which, so someone like you as an organizer, the tools typically leverage the ability to scale, right? So you think about thousands to tens of thousands of people using social media in education. I mean, I think the expectation would be, okay, well, we're going to hold a book club, so it's on Switch, and that would actually allow for a broader audience across the web. But maybe the lesson is that it's a set of tools that could be used by people who are typically more local and have more connections, and the scale doesn't really play out as its strength. Because I've done the same thing. I thought, okay, so I'll start some book clubs, and I just never got the response that I expected the scale would give me.
Right. No, and that's actually a great point. And I actually started on the opposite end of the spectrum. My first goal was, I need to read a book. I spent a lot of years not reading, or rather I should say, reading children's literature with my children. Once I was done with my master's, it was kind of like, wow, I'm done with this. And I felt very bad about that for a few years. So I said, I just need some encouragement to read. And I actually started with the expectation of, I'm going to put this out on the internet and I'm going to get nobody. All right? Because I'm this, living in a small little town in St. Joseph, Michigan, and I don't have a lot of followers on Twitter, and not a lot of people read my blog and everything. But I do know that I have a nice small network of people here in the Michigan area that I connect with several times a year. And so I purposely said I want this to be small, and I wasn't worried about scaling it up and making it large. I really wanted it to be that sort of intimate book club that you might have at your small independent bookstore, which I spent 6 or 7 years working at an independent bookstore through college. And that's exactly what their book club was. It was 5 or 6 people once a month would get together and have conversations, and it was just this nice intimate setting, and they all knew each other. And that's really what I wanted. So even if I got 1 or 2 people that I knew, that was going to be a huge win for me. So in my case, setting the expectations low, which I know a lot of people, oh my gosh, we don't ever want to hear that. Expectations need to be high. That actually helped me to carry this out, because even when I had 1 or 2 or 3 people, that was a huge win for me just to get me through the book. Now we'll see if I feel that way as we get ready this weekend, I'll be sending out the request for the next book to read. I'm hoping for more. That would be fantastic. But that's where I started from.
Okay, so Kyle said he would be willing to share his own experience in this. As we were talking, he said that he was able to do this, a local group at his school division, plus they opened it up to some others. So Kyle, if I've given you mic privileges, you click on the talk button at the top left below Ben's image, and if we hear you, we'll know it's working.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So tell us what you did.
So I'm a woman. So first of all, I'll just clarify. I know my name is very confusing. But I was inspired, I think, and maybe I participated in the Flat Class Virtual Book Club with Vicki Davis and Julie Lindsay last spring, and so I wanted to do the same thing with teachers in my school division. So I actually went through our professional learning office, and teachers that participated got minimal, but they got recertification points, and so that kind of gave me a solid chunk of about 10 to 15 teachers that signed up through the school division, and then I just tweeted and advertised and worked through the Global Classroom Network with Michael Graffin a little bit, and got a few more people in that way. And so that was kind of a nice balance of people that I saw, fairly regularly and were kind of, I think felt loyal to me in the sense of like, oh, Kyle's going to ask me if I'm coming to the virtual book club next week, I better read, versus just the people that were kind of out in the Twitterscape that, might drop in and might not. But, even in that group, there are a few people that pretty much came, I'd say probably to 5 of the 7 sessions or something like that. So that was a nice balance for me.
Kyle, what tools did you use?
I used both an EduBlogs and then Blackboard Collaborate, and that was Vicki Davis and Julie Lindsay lent me a room so that I could use that tool. And
the tool, so Blackboard Collaborate, the environment we're obviously in, it sometimes has a little bit of a learning curve for people or a barrier. Did you find that was problematic for anybody?
Yes. I mean, there are definitely people the first session that were completely blown away and overwhelmed by it all. And if I run one again using that tool, I would definitely do a little more work up front to make sure people were more comfortable with the tools and maybe even just really slowed down the first session more so that people felt welcomed by it and not just kind of overwhelmed. On the other hand, though, I'll say that was most people that were overwhelmed were also really excited about it and really wanted to learn it and immediately saw all the potential that it had. So the second session, I was very conscious about slowing things down and walking through some of the tools more, and I think from there it got better.
Kyle, I wonder if you would talk briefly about kind of how you managed each session. Was it chapter by chapter? Did you prepare questions or the like? And then, Ben, if maybe you could kind of comment back and talk about how you chose to organize Book Club 106's discussions.
Sure. Yeah, I wish I was more constructivist about it, probably. It was probably pretty directed. For the first time, I think I was pretty anxious about having too much dead space or maybe not being prepared enough. And so I think we did about 2 chapters a session, and we met every other week. And that was also just selfish on my part. I've got young kids too, and I didn't know how often I could, hold the virtual session. So anyway, so we did about 2 chapters each time we met. And on the blog space, I would put some questions there ahead of time, and also just to have a space where I could advertise on Twitter, upcoming session, and this is what the chapters are about. And then, I prepped questions, and I tried to always have a co-moderator who I would send the slides to ahead of time so they could kind of look over and see how it went. The other thing I found right away was that I was the only one talking a lot, and so trying to build in pieces that people felt comfortable. So doing a lot of stuff with the whiteboard where I would kind of say, which of the following tools have you tried before? And people could either circle things or put little check marks next to things. And I found that made me feel like more people were participating that weren't ready to get onto the microphone. And then as the sessions went on, we did use the breakout group feature in Blackboard Collaborate, and that was very positive. I mean, people really liked that, and they said how it forced them to talk, whereas before they were really just kind of sitting and listening or reading the chat. And so that was a positive.
That was a great description. So Ben, could you sort of address the same issues, and then maybe talk a little bit about Google Hangouts and the choice of Google Hangouts and the positives or negatives there?
Yeah, sure. I actually wanted to try and push that connectivist as much as possible because I know that I can be slightly domineering in conversations. So I used Google Moderator, which for some reason is not showing up on the site right now. It's all broken, unfortunately. But Google Moderator is a really nice tool to throw out ideas and questions, and then you can invite other people in the group to submit responses. So very similar to like a Socrative or one of the other Poll Anywhere, that type of response tool. But then it also has this nice little thumbs up, thumbs down feature. So I use that every week. We take a chapter or two, depending on the length, and as we switch, we broke it up into sections. And then we would just, for the whole week, as people were reading, encourage them to go and list questions or topics in the Google Moderator, and then other people could go and I encourage thumbs up, not really any thumbs down, but I encourage thumbs up, and people to respond to those questions or to post some more of their own. So then when we actually got together the night of, I looked at the Google Moderator and I took the top three vote getters, I guess you could say, the ideas or conversation starters that had the most thumbs up. I took those and used those to help moderate the session. And then that was also nice because people that weren't able to participate in the video were able to at least participate asynchronously through the Google Moderator and put some replies and things there.
So I pulled up one of my own Google Moderator links, but it seems to pull up, but I don't see any data in there. So I think you have to actually I think you have to be logged in on your browser to your own Google account to have it show up. So we may not be able to display it easily. Let's see.
Yeah, I just sent a link in the chat. You could try that one.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to do a share here. Let's try that and see if that works.
Ooh, so let's start sharing.
Give me a second and I'll try and figure it out. Okay, so so one of the things about the difference between sort of Blackboard Collaborate and Google Hangouts, aside from the fact that Blackboard Collaborate and WebEx and these others are a little more complicated, right? And so there's more learning to take place and there's more sort of visually going on the screen, is that they are tools that often have been designed for classroom work specifically, and so they tend to do a better job, especially with more than 10 people. Right, so Google Hangouts is great. The moment you go on air, you then actually have sort of two separate chat conversations. You have your small group that are in the Hangout, and then you have the chat that's underneath the YouTube video. What were some other sort of technical things that you found about Google Hangouts that would be useful to people to know in terms of thinking about holding the virtual book club?
Well, actually, the same thing that Kyle said. It seems like no matter how hard you try, there's this technical barrier between people connecting in a room like this, in a situation like this, via video. And so the biggest barrier was, first of all, in order to do Google Hangout, you got to have a Google Plus account, which thankfully Google has made easier. Just in the few months since we finished up our second book, if you have a Google account, that's your Google Plus account, so that was easier. But then getting people to understand that there's a certain platform you need to be on. There are certain features of Google Plus Hangouts that you could do on the desktop that you couldn't do in the iOS version or on the Android version. I think that's different now, but for a while there you couldn't do a Google Hangout on air on an iPad, and one of our participants was trying to connect for a couple weeks and she couldn't she couldn't make it happen. So bless her heart, she was watching the videos for a couple weeks on her own afterwards. So getting people to understand it's a much better experience if you're on the desktop and you've got a Google account, and then just figuring out Google, because it's not as easy as Skype where we exchange our contacts and then we can go ahead and converse, or even as simple as this where you get a link and people all get dumped into the room. Google likes to change things around. So one week the little blue button for hanging out is right up here in the corner, and then the next week it's over on the other side or somewhere else. So that was one of the limitations or the biggest hurdle. But after that, I found the Google Plus Hangout to be really a nice space for that face-to-face. You know, just like Skype, something like that. We can all see each other. We can we can sort of gauge how the conversation is going based on those nice visual cues that you would have in a regular face-to-face environment.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, I'll turn my video back on. I had it on at the beginning of the show, but I turned it off because I'm not in a well-lit place. I'm in New York visiting and staying in an apartment that's just got low lighting. But there is something really nice about Google Hangouts in terms of seeing everybody who's in the Hangout, even though it's a limited number of people. It's still, I think, up to 10, right? It is really nice to be able to see everybody in that Hangout. I can use Google Hangouts on my phone. So I have an Android phone and an Android tablet, and it works quite well. Although I had a laugh today because I was being interviewed in a Google Hangout, and the Hangout app went through the update process in the middle of the interview, so then actually kicked me out and to restart the app. And I thought, okay, that's sort of like the last thing you want. Okay, figure that out. But this is a small team at Google, and it does make it feel like, say, Blackboard Collaborate, it used to be Elluminate. For all that we whine and moan about a commercial company providing a service, there is a revenue model, right? So Blackboard Collaborate is going to continue to work. They have to make sure that it's working for all of these schools. Whereas Google Hangouts, I mean, Google can turn that key off at any point in time, like they have just done with Reader, right?
Google Reader,
or Google's Start page. What's that called? iGoogle, right? So something that some of us felt like was sort of central to a lot of our practice, especially Google Reader, all of a sudden can just go away.
Yeah. Oh no, that's a very big concern, and I actually had that happen to me a few years ago. I got really burned. The social bookmarking site of choice that I chose had a problem. Apparently, it was a one-man band sort of a thing, and there was a problem with the database. It became corrupt, and he basically lost everybody's bookmarks. And that actually burned me on social bookmarking for quite a while until I finally got back into Diigo. But yeah, that is a concern. As I'm finding out now, with this Google moderator, the tool is there. It's great, but it really hasn't been supported or updated recently, and I can't really seem to get it to embed in Google Sites too well anymore. But the one thing I did bank on is that YouTube wouldn't be going away anytime soon.
Right.
I got my fingers crossed now that I've said that.
Hey, so Linda asked the question in the chat. She wanted to know about if anybody had been doing virtual or online book clubs with students, especially during the summer. So Ben, I don't know if you have an answer, or if anybody in the room actually has an answer. Feel free to raise your virtual hand. That's the third icon over in the participant box, and just it's a hand. You could click on it if there's anybody who would like to address that. And Ben, have you heard of anything like this? Have you seen any success in doing student book clubs?
Personally, no, I haven't seen that. I have seen there is one book club, I'll put a link here, called the Nerdy Book Club, and that's actually facilitated by another teacher here in Michigan, Colby Sharp, and an educator down in Texas. And they do a traditional blog style where someone reads a book and they go ahead and they give an overview of the book and the questions and sort of the topics that they feel might be really suitable for a book club. And they're very inviting. We've got this nice thing here. It says, "Want to be a nerdy blogger? Sign up here." I would assume they would be welcome to having students, especially secondary students, middle school or high school, participate and add to that, because they have quite a list of nerdy book bloggers in the blog world. But I have not seen any student ones. Maybe someone in the chat has.
So Terry's got a raised hand there. Terry, either turn your mic on, click on the talk button at the top left, and we'll see if your mic goes on. If we don't hear you, it means your mic's not configured.
Hello.
Oh, we can hear you. There you are.
Hi, I'm Terry. I'm a third grade teacher here in Caledonia, Michigan. And a friend of mine over in Brighton, we just tried to do a online book club between our two third grade classes using Beverly Cleary books. And we are both novices at Google Sites. We want to try to figure out how to use them, so we were stumbling our way through it. Erin, Mrs. John Andrea, the third grader on the other side of the state, she led the discussion through Skype, and she taught both of our classrooms through Skype how to get on and create their Google site. Or actually, she created the site, but she talked to them on how to join the book club, and she shared the site with each of the different groups for the Beverly Cleary books. But I will say, number one, it's been a bit frustrating, but that's the best part about it. You got to find your way to get through it, because then when you get to the other side, you go, now why was this so hard? Because eventually it gets easy. But when we started, and one of our biggest frustrations right now, if we have three students from both classrooms reading the same book on the same Google Site book club account, they can't all work at the same time. So if you're trying, she set it up like the 7 keys to comprehension. So each tab was, one of them was about what connections did you make, another tab would be about what questions do you have, and we would have the kids edit. And they would go to the edit part of Google Site on that tab, and they would enter their questions or their comments or their images, whatever they had. But they couldn't, only one person could do it at a time. So if 3 in my class were trying to do it, one would be typing and the other one would try to type in as well, and it would say, student A is already typing, do you want to kick them out? Okay, that created all kinds of havoc because they loved kicking each other out. And it would erase everybody's work. So there were some problems with it, but nothing that we can't figure out what to do in the future and make some adjustments. The idea of the online book club between 2 third grade classrooms has been fabulous, and they're loving it, and they're encouraged to read, and they love sharing. They love posting their pictures. They love writing on their marker board tables their ideas, and then they take pictures of that and post that. There's all kinds of things we can do with it. So it's been good, but of course it's the end of this school year, and now we need to rethink how we're going to do it, because that has been frustrating, the kicking them off stuff.
Yeah, I saw Chris in the chat mention Kid Blog, and I've actually been working trying to introduce more teachers in my district to blogging, and we've had some success actually at the 3rd grade level and the 6th grade level. Got a lot of teachers there that like to blog for some reason, and they've had a lot of success with that, so that way the students in a few of the 3rd grade classes going back and forth to each other, they'll write up a post one week, and it's the other classroom's job to respond to that in the comments, and then they'll flip, and the following week classroom B will be responsible for putting up the post, and the first class will respond. And that way they don't have to run into the kicking each other off.
That's a really great idea. I was going to ask the question about the asynchronous piece, right? Because do you have a discussion forum? You use Google Moderator. I'm assuming people can make comments, I think, on a Google Moderator question with votes, but it's not sort of highly intuitive the way like a Ning would be or a Google Groups would have been.
Yep.
So I like the blog solution. Somebody in the chat here, let's see, Kyle mentions VoiceThread. I hadn't thought of that, but that seems like that might be kind of a brilliant way to elicit comments, especially for younger students. Carolyn says use a wiki. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. She said use a wiki, and my 8th grade science teachers, I've been working for the last couple of years working on some challenge-based units where the students have to work collaboratively in wikis. And at first everything was great, and then they ran into the same situation with that you always have with a wiki where only one person can edit at a time. And actually this year, a lot of those 8th grade teachers have shifted over to Google Docs. So I was just working with all of my English language arts teachers at 8th grade level on a big multi-genre collaborative project. And all of their groups, they gave them 2 spaces. They gave them one shared Google Doc, and they gave them one shared Google presentation. And they used the Google Doc for all of their writing, note-taking, annotations, copying and pasting links, and they could have that conversation there in Google Docs. The teachers just asked them, before you write something, just put in brackets like your initials or something, so we know that's your part, you add it. And then in the Google presentation, as you assemble your final presentation, put your little name at the bottom of each of your slides that you're working on. So they have these 2 different environments that actually work out very well.
Carolyn mentioned that some of the wiki services have a discussion capability. I used Wikispaces quite a bit, and there was the discussion tab, but it wasn't always intuitive how to get there, although it does provide for that. I mean, even Diigo has discussion forums and capability, but it feels like in some ways, well, you're choosing to take people to a specific place. Go ahead, Ben.
No, I think you're really close to it. In some cases, it's whether or not it's intuitive, but I think in many cases where when you get something as simple and elegant as a Google Doc, we're all right there, we can type, and sure, it might be a little crazy after the 5 or 6 of us all try to type at once. But once you've had that and you're all typing and writing and chatting in real time, I think sometimes, especially for older students, it's almost a little difficult to take them back and say, no, let's go back to this structure and click over here on this link and respond. Not saying they can't work, because I've seen teachers at my high school do amazing work with Google Groups to generate online conversation. But there's something about the simplicity of a Google Doc.
Okay, so I'm going to be the old guy here, and I'm going to say Google Docs is kind of exciting, and it's exciting to see other people typing, but sometimes it becomes so free-form and unstructured that it feels as though it's not productive. Is that just me being an old guy?
Nope, that's you being a good educator. I tell teachers, if you're going to have more than a couple people working in a Google Doc, make sure you have some type of outline or you have some type of rubric. So for the ELA project that I mentioned, the multi-genre project, we actually developed a sort of like a notebook, so to speak, a template Google Doc that had an area for this is your task. Remember, this is what you need to be doing, and here's where you should be keeping your notes. And then here's a few guiding questions that they pulled out of the curriculum guide. And then they even had we created a section for the students to create their own guiding questions for the assignment. So before they started working, they had to show the teachers that they were addressing, that they had a plan to address all of this, your topic, and you're addressing the teachers' questions that they provided, but then also generating some of their own groups guiding questions, so that there was some sort of structure there.
Okay, interesting. I'm wondering if anybody in the audience has any more questions about the technical or kind of the use of tools and the like, because I want to jump a little bit toward a more philosophical discussion. But before I do so, is there anything that anybody wanted to bring up related to these kinds of organizational or tool-related issues? How many people could you chat with in a Google Hangout? I think the limit is 10, right, Ben?
Yeah, I believe the limit is the number of people talking on the panel is 10, but you can stream live to an indefinite number of people.
So the Hangouts on air goes through YouTube, but those people can't actually interact chat-wise with the 10 who are in the immediate circle, right?
Correct, yeah. If you're not invited to the panel on the Google Hangout on air, then you can't participate. You can't participate via video. However, on the YouTube page where it embeds the streaming video, there is a chat, so you can actually live chat with the participants.
Okay, which means that the people in the Hangout actually have to keep track of two chats. There's the Hangout chat and the YouTube chat, which is actually then sort of double video bandwidth for them who are doing that. Okay, so a couple quick questions here. Rhonda wants to know, how many of your group were men?
Actually, I was just starting to type the answer to that, and Rhonda, there were more men in the group than there were women, but the women were more dedicated to the group in terms of help providing responses in the Google Moderator, watching the videos after the fact, and showing up. Again, the groups were really small. Some nights there were just 2 or 3 of us. I think at the most maybe we had 4 or 5. But there were more men. And maybe that speaks to my PLN and the people that I've generated, because I did this all based just on Twitter, just tossing it out there. Now this summer, for this next book, when I put it out this weekend, I'll actually be inviting my own staff to come and participate, and we'll see if that changes anything.
So this is interesting. Linda talks about Today's Meet, and I hadn't thought about this, but Today's Meet is a kind of a collaborative writing tool, sort of back channel tool. So you could theoretically hold a Google Hangout, you could broadcast it, and then you could tell the participants, both in the broadcast and in the actual Hangout, not to use the internal chat, but to go to Today's Meet and use a more universal chat tool, so that everybody, in fact, could participate. Even though only 10 videos could be seen, you could actually have a broad platform of conversation that included people beyond, like here in Blackboard Collaborate, right? You could have 100 people, they can all participate in the chat. So you have a single chat which allows for that kind of larger group. 140 character. Oh, does Today's Meet have a character limit? I don't know. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it has 140 character.
That's funny. So this is a good segue for me, right? Because the technology in and of itself becomes kind of addictive or engaging in a way that I can spend hours configuring my Android tablet or phone, right? And I can justify that this is actually making me more productive. And the truth is, it does. There's an incredible amount of data, information, and things that come through the phone. But there's also a degree to which that engagement can blind me to larger picture questions. Right? Questions of, is the conversation worth having? How am I spending my time? What's really going on? So there are some big questions here, right? You know, a big question would be, do teachers have enough time to read and do professional development? And we can figure out tools to create sort of forums for this. But is there a deeper question about the ability for teachers to actually spend time reading books that would inform their practice? And you obviously started, that's not obvious, but I know it, but you started Book Club 106 because you wanted to be doing more reading. Mm-hmm. Has it made a difference for you? And is this actually the solution, or should we be talking about sort of a deeper issue of making sure teachers have time to do this kind of PD?
Well, to answer the first question, yes, it has made a difference for me. I've read more books now than I have in the last 2-3 years, which for those of you in your audience that read a lot, it's a very, very paltry sum. But just the fact that I've read, a couple books now and had that conversation encouraged me to go grab another couple books, and actually I've gone ahead and picked up some fiction books. I'm reading The Hobbit right now with my daughter, and that for me is unusual because I'm not the type of person that will usually reread books, fiction or nonfiction. So that actually I can see some of the changes happening there. But to the bigger question of, is it going to pull teachers in? I'm not sure. I'm starting to see some more teachers in my district, and again, I can only speak to my own experience. I'm starting to see them participate more in Twitter chats, and that's encouraging. If they can dedicate an hour a week to a particular Twitter chat, then it's certainly feasible that they could, donate an hour a week to a conversation about a book. then of course the question is, do they have time to read the book? Now in our district, our administrators are huge on book clubs, and usually one or two of the schools will have a book that they're reading as a part of their professional development through the year. So I'm hoping, so I know that teachers will make the time. It's just a matter of will they make the time to read something on their own versus something that they're getting professional development credit or hours for.
I want to make sure I don't miss anything in the chat. If anybody's got a comment here that we need to look at specifically, I'm going to ask the next question, but then I promise to read back through the chat. Part of what's interesting to me about the use of technology in education right now is that it feels like the history of educational technology, or at least computerized technology, has not necessarily been a liberating force, right, producing sort of independent thinking, but has often been sort of one more way of keeping track of or doing kind of behaviorist, Skinnerian kind of tracking, right, or tasks that get assigned. Go use the computer to do this and then come back. Web 2.0 feels as though it has this huge potential to focus on voice and agency and the kinds of things that Skinner didn't really think existed, right? This independent self that makes decisions outside of external forces. What's the balance there? Are we doing a good job of getting to this core potential of Web 2.0 in schools, or do we tend to use the tools the way we've used that tech in the last 20 years as just an extension of kind of carrot and stick education?
Yeah, I actually just wrote about a week or so ago. There's a link in the chat if you want to see my thoughts about that, about the revolving door of technology and education. And this actually was a DS-106 assignment. I had to make an animated GIF, so I got this wonderful image of this door just going stuck in this perpetual forward, backward motion. And I think there's a lot of really fancy, expensive digital pencils in the hands of our students and our teachers. We are very quick, educators are, and I put myself in that boat. We are very quick to reinvent, or rather not reinvent, we're very quick to substitute traditional analog practices with digital practices. And typically you get to the point where teachers start to augment, and I'll use the SAMR metaphor for those that are familiar with that. They get to the point where they start to augment or adapt or modify before something else happens. Now there's a new piece of technology. And so we kind of start all over again with that. Or something else comes along and you haven't gotten to that point where you're starting to augment or modify or really redefine what you're capable of doing before people start looking and going, well, that technology is old. And I see the debate with interactive whiteboards, and iPads, and people going, oh, well, the interactive whiteboards are terrible, and people get, they get a lot of denigration, and that discourages people from trying to push forward and really redefining what they can do in their classroom. So I don't know if that answers, yes, what's possible.
I got caught in the chat.
No, that's okay.
So Jen mentioned that she started a thing called The Main Idea. She put the link in there.
Oh, yeah.
Education book summaries. Kyle talks about a vibrant face-to-face book, reading young adult fiction. That brings up a really interesting point for me, which is I tend to talk about engagement trumping content. I'm going to turn off the audio here. Someone's turned their audio on. I talk about engagement trumping content, but I didn't think about that for educators as well, right? Which is the temptation would be to read an education book, like a book on pedagogy. But I would love to read, I love the dystopian teen fiction, right? So the idea of doing something that's fun, that's not necessarily another assignment, probably is a great lead into kind of building a practice around book discussions.
Oh, yeah.
If anybody else saw something in the chat that I want to call out, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I think someone earlier in the chat mentioned, I believe it was Kyle, that mentioned that they have a book group their teachers and they read young adult fiction. And that's fantastic. I love that. I would love to do that. I keep throwing books like that on the DS-106 list. I would really love to read True Confessions of a Wallflower. Is that what it is? It was the one that turned into the movie. And people keep voting it down. They love their teacher books, their nerdy teacher books. So I go with the group.
Well, that's funny because I've probably done the same thing, right? I picked Ivan Illich, I picked John Dewey, right? Okay, things that we feel like, and I am interested in, but I was sort of thinking, okay, there are a lot of these books that we talk about, but have we actually read them? You know, do we really know what they are? And so
right.
Maybe it would be fun to just pick a book that's sort of a popular new book that's not necessarily one that is a feel like we must read book.
Right. Well, actually, and Jen in the chat, she just asked how do we pick the books for which one we read for the book club. Actually, this weekend, for those of you on the site, you'll see it. What I do is I throw out a Google form that has a few suggestions for myself. Here's the kind of books that I'm either a couple books that are on my shelf or I'm interested in, and then I'll throw an other, and I'll give everybody a week to just suggest books, and then I'll take that list and I'll throw it out as a Google form and say, let's vote on which one you guys want to read, and I'll give it another week. So there's a little bit of lead time setting it up, and I really want to try and be as democratic as possible. And then from there, whichever one gets the highest vote, we go ahead and we read that one. But like I said before, it seems like we gravitate towards those education books. I would really love to read Ready Player One, which is this fantastic dystopian, almost Hunger Games-esque book. I believe it's a young adult book that takes place in sort of like this dystopian 80s version of the future, where people play video games. So like the Hunger Games, right? We only have limited resources, but people are playing video games to compete for them rather than, killing each other, which is nice. But that's all I know about the book, but it sounds interesting. I'd love to read that.
Oh, this is really fun. Okay, so we've just got a couple of minutes left. There are some good comments in the chat. If there was something you wanted to bring up, that's Ben or anybody in the audience, about online or virtual book clubs or this kind of reading in a Web 2.0 world, let's do it now. We've got a minute or two to do so. Ben, is there anything that you were hoping we would talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
No, not really. I mean, this has always just been an exploration for me, and as someone else mentioned earlier, that was chatting, I believe it was Kyle. We stumble through a lot of stuff, and that's okay. It's all right to do that. I kind of look at this as a way to show students and show other educators that, hey, we can learn with the best of you. We don't have all the answers.
Okay. Hey, Ben, this has really been fun. Thanks for doing it. I know that you've worked it around family time, and I appreciate it. Thanks all of you for coming and for the comments, and the recording will be up within about an hour from now. I'll get it up on futureofeducation.com and at stevehargan.com. And don't miss Larry Ferlazzo next week on self-driven learning. Hey, thanks, Ben.
Well, thank you, Steve, very much for having me. I appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night or day, depending on where you are. Feel free to continue the conversation either in the Mighty Bell, which I'll put the link back up again, on my blog post, or directly with Ben. And Ben, go ahead and put some information in the chat if people want to get in touch with you directly.
Sure, happy to do that.
There's that Mighty Bell link. Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye now.
Bye-bye.